We're here today to dedicate a building. And indeed, my perspective is unique. My father first came to a knowledge of the sacred names when I was about 5 years old. And so I pretty much was grown up with this whole experience. Today I want to share a little bit with you about history. Those of you who know Solomon and my father, he was a man that liked to talk about history, sometimes to the boredom of everybody around him. So I'm not going back to the beginning and taking all the progressive steps up to today. But I had something happen to me yesterday. Those of you who know the Fryestown Assembly is in the process of doing a pretty major project of rebuilding a 170-year-old church into an assembly worship center. And in the process of that, I have hired 2 contractors from the local area. Both of the men were selected because they are scrupulous in their integrity. That is what they're known for. And also, they are both very deeply religious. They're believers. The one contractor was a man that grew up in the congregation that owned the building. He was actually, as a child, an attendee at the building, which closed 50 some odd years ago. So I knew him, I grew up with him. He and I went to school together. We were on the wrestling team together, we were on the track team together, and all that kind of cool stuff. The other contractor was selected also for his scrupulous integrity. He is a bishop of the Dunkard Brethren Church, for those of you who have any familiarity with that. That is an offshoot from the organization, the denomination that built the building that we have. And so they both kind of have connections there with it. What I want to share with you today, I hope you get to see that Yahweh's got all kinds of connections just under the surface that none of us are aware of. But at the appropriate time, in the appropriate way, he brings them to the surface. So I stopped at the building yesterday morning before we left, just to tie up some loose ends for the weekend and so that they get the beginning of this coming week started. And in the course of talking to the one man, I mentioned to him that I'm leaving for this trip, and he said something in relation to his sons who are also working with him as contractors on the job. And he said that his one son was going to be doing something for somebody else. He's got 2 or 3 different projects ongoing at the same time. His son was going to be doing something today to catch up one of his other projects. And then he stopped and he said, I really feel uncomfortable when I mention something like that to you because I know you keep the 7th-day Sabbath. So I said, you know, I understand, I appreciate where you're coming from. I said, but that's up to you as to what you do there. Then he said, after he said that, I guess that assuaged his conscience a little bit. And then he said, you know, he said, I've got Sabbath keepers in my background, in my family. And I said, oh, really, you do? He said, yeah. He said, yeah, my father's cousin and my grandmother and family were Sabbath keepers. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. He said, as a matter of fact, my father's cousin moved to Israel and felt that he was supposed to be part of the fulfillment of end-time prophecy, so he went there. He said he actually was the publisher of a magazine, and I said, oh, really? This is pretty interesting. I said, his name is Beck. So I said to him, was your family name Beck in Israel? He said, no. He said, it was my grandmother. It was her family. It was Fouth. I said, this is strange. For those of you who know the COG Seventh Day history, the stories, A.N. Duggar, who started the COG Seventh Day Jerusalem, most of the fruit that we are dealing with on an international basis is a consequence of that. So anyway, he said Fouth, and I said, this is just too much to be coincidence. I said, Gordon? Now it was his turn to be shocked. He said, you know who I mean? I said, absolutely. So then I was relating our side of the story as to the connections and commonality we have And he was relating things from a family perspective as far as this being his dad's cousin. I found out as a result of our conversation that when he goes to Israel, which he does occasionally, when he goes to Israel, he stays with his family. His Fouth cousins are actually farming a ranch that he inherited from his father out in Montana. So all these connections are there. Now to back up just a little bit with respect to what I'm talking about. For those of you who have studied anything as far as the growth and development of the Sabbath-keeping groups in modern times, most of it originated in the Baptist movement. That's where it started. You have the Seventh-day Baptists, you have the German Seventh-day Baptists, you have the growth from that with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you have the C of G Seventh-day, you have all these things coming together. The Meyer family were actually Sabbath keepers 298 years ago now, here in America. They were part of the German Seventh-day Baptists. The group that built our assembly, their second leader was Jacob Meyer, who was Solomon's and my direct ancestor like 8 or 9 generations back. But Elder Jacob Meyer was the second elder, the second leader of the congregation that built our assembly hall. He was the one that led that congregation from Sabbath keeping to Sunday worship. And so now I think it's kind of interesting that we're taking things back the other direction. This contractor that I'm talking about, whose father's, I guess it would be his second cousin. He calls them his second cousins, the Fouth children. But what he was telling me with respect to them is he has had so much curiosity when he talks to me about the way we are so involved with international ministry and the success it's having, because the Dunkard Brethren is trying the same thing. He was very proud that they have 4 congregations in East Africa. I said, well, we're dealing with approximately 60. And he kind of backed up. When I talk religion with his father, or their father, his sons will stop and listen. It's the only time you'll see them stop working on the job, is when we start to talk about religion. Every other time they keep working. They are fascinated with what we're doing. I realized on the way out here yesterday, we have a tremendous impact that we can make if we play these connections correctly. He is a bishop. He's one of the most prominent men in the Dunkard Brethren Church in America. When I go back, I'm going to tell him that this international ministry, which so fascinates him, is actually building upon something which his family has been working. Brethren and sisters, Yahweh is doing something. He's bringing these connections back. He is Church of the Brethren. My family was Church of the Brethren. We are Sacred Name, Sabbath-keeping believers. A portion of his family was Sabbath-keeping and, to a degree, Sacred Name users. All these things coming together, as Elder Don was saying, we have these connections. And that's one of the blessings we have with something like a building like this, with a dedication. We are here to create these oases around the world that people can come to. They can be restored and refreshed. And as they do so, the connections of the body can be made. This is just a building. It's something temporary. The building that we are restoring in Pennsylvania is just something temporary. But it's a place where people can come. They can be refreshed. They can be connected in a way they have never been before. And Yahweh was providing connections just from totally unexpected directions. I never in my wildest imagination would have thought something like that would take place, that Justin's father was first cousins to Gordon Fouth. I can't quite wrap my head around that one yet. Especially since Justin's father came from Montana, still owns the ranch, which is now Justin's. But here, he came back to Pennsylvania because he married a woman from Pennsylvania, and her mother had become ill. So they moved back here to care for her and just wound up staying. So all these things happen for a reason, and it's up to us as we discover the links, as we discover the common ground, as Elder David was saying. We have this common ground. We need to find that common ground instead of looking at people as someone to challenge and attack. Find the common ground, connect on it, and then build from it. And so this may be a building, but it is a place that Yahweh can use, and I'm really glad to see that Solomon and his family are so dedicated to making something happen here, because there's fertile soil in Ohio. So Yahweh bless you guys, and keep on keeping on. Yahweh is good.